My name is Delia Vance. I'm 37 years old. The night I told my parents I was marrying a broke single father, my mother looked across the dinner table at his 7-year-old daughter, a child who was sitting right there, holding a fork with both hands, and she said, loud enough for the whole room, "We don't take in other people's leftovers." Then she gave me a choice. Walk out of that house with him. Or come back to the table alone and stay a daughter. I walked out. For 11 years, every single card that little girl mailed to her grandparents came back to my mailbox unopened. 11 years of a child's handwriting, crossed out in my mother's ink. And the whole time, my family told anyone who would listen that I had abandoned my dying father for a man who drilled wells for a living. I believed them. That's the part one still have trouble saying out loud. I carried that guilt like a second set of bones. And then my husband's little 2-truck company got bought by people with actual money. On paper, we were worth $41 million. 11 days later, my mother and my sister were standing in my living room. My mother was holding a folder. And inside that folder was a typed list. Numbered. Itemized. Like an invoice. My husband picked it up. He read the whole thing without saying a word. And then this man, who had never once raised his voice in my house, smiled the smallest smile I have ever seen on a human face, leaned toward me, and whispered one word. They didn't know it yet. But the one sentence they typed on page 2 to shame me, the one they thought was their strongest card, had just handed us the only thing that could take their entire 11-year story apart. Before I take you into that room, do me one small favor. If you're new here, hit like and subscribe. It genuinely keeps these stories going. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read them. All of them. All right. Let me start where it actually started. To understand how a grown woman looks at a 7-year-old child and calls her leftovers, you have to understand the house I grew up in. We were not poor. That was the first thing my mother wanted you to know about us, usually within 4 minutes of meeting you. We had the corner lot on Chandler Street. We had the pew 3 rows from the front. And we had the orchard. 16 acres of peach trees up past the county line, with a low white farmhouse my grandfather put up himself in 1961. My mother talked about that orchard the way some people talk about a family crest. It wasn't land to her. It was proof. Proof that the Ainsley family had always had somewhere to go and something to leave behind. In that house, love wasn't a given. It was a wage. You earned it by Sunday. You could lose it by Monday. And my mother, Corinne, kept the books. My sister Bryn is 4 years older than me, and she was permanently in credit. She was the one they photographed. There were 2 frames on the mantel my whole childhood, and in both of them Bryn is dead center, laughing, and I am somewhere off at the edge, half turned away, like even at 9 years old I already understood which part of the picture was mine. My parents were proud of Bryn the way people are proud of a stock that's going up. They talked about her prospects. When she got engaged, my mother cried at the announcement dinner. When Bryn's marriage quietly fell apart 6 years later, nobody mentioned it. Not once. Not ever. Which tells you everything about how my family handled a truth that didn't flatter us. My father, Delmar, loved me quietly. I want to be fair to him, even now, even after everything. He never raised his voice at me. Not one time in 37 years. He also never once stood in front of me. He had this habit. When my mother decided something at the table, he would take his napkin and fold it into a small perfect square, and then study it like it was a document that needed his signature. I learned to read that square by the time I was 8. It meant I agree with her. Or it meant I'm too tired to disagree. Which, in our house, came to exactly the same thing. And me? I became the child who kept records. I think it started as self-defense. In a house where the story could get rewritten depending on who my mother needed to be angry at that week, I learned to hold on to what actually happened. I kept cards. I kept receipts. I wrote dates in the margins of things. Later it became my whole career. I spent 14 years in the claims department of a mid-size insurer, comparing what people said they were owed against what they had actually put their name to. I was good at it. I spent my working life proving what people really agreed to. I never once imagined I'd have to do it to my own mother. I met Cole Bannister on a Thursday in March at the front counter of that claims office. He came in to fight a denial. A well he drilled for a client had come back flagged for contamination that was already in the ground before he ever touched it, and somebody was trying to hang it on him. He'd driven 40 minutes on his lunch break to ask a question most men are too proud to ask. He wasn't too proud. He set a beat-up folder on my counter and said, "I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking somebody to read what I actually signed." He had dirt worked into his forearms that no amount of scrubbing was ever going to fully get out. And he had this patience in his voice that did not match how tired his face looked. And behind him, in one of those hard plastic chairs by the window, there was a little girl with a spiral notebook. Not coloring. Writing. With her tongue pushed into her cheek, working. Her name was Wren. She was 6 years old. While I was pulling up her father's file, she came over and put the notebook on my counter without being asked, and turned it around so I could read it. At the top of the page, in that big careful handwriting kids have, she had written, "People who came." And under it was a list. Her dad. A woman named Miss Ottilie. Her bus driver. Somebody named Des. I said, "What's this one for, honey?" And she said, "It's for my birthday. I write down who comes. That way I don't get it mixed up later." I didn't know it that morning. But a 6-year-old had just handed me the entire shape of the next 11 years of my life, in pencil. I told her it was a good list. She nodded once, very seriously, like a professional accepting a fair review, and took it back. I want to be clear about something, because of how this story got told later. Cole Bannister was not a project. I did not run off with some doomed romantic idea of fixing a man. He was a tired 34-year-old with a kid, a truck older than she was, and $11,000 in equipment debt. He drilled water wells and ran pump lines and did the unglamorous work of getting clean water out of ground that didn't want to give it up. He had a temper he kept on a very short leash, and he apologized both times it slipped. And on our third real conversation he told me, straight out, "Delia, I'm not a good bet." He said it like it was information he owed me. That's what did it. I grew up around people who would not admit a flaw under oath. And here was a man laying his out on the table so I could decide with my eyes open. Wren's mother had left when Wren was 14 months old. Cole never once said an ugly word about her. He'd just say, "She wasn't built to stay," and then, "And Wren is never going to feel like she was the reason." I fell for the father first. The daughter took longer, because the daughter made me earn it. Wren ran a test on adults. When I came by, she'd find a window and check whether my car was still parked out front. She never asked if I was staying. She watched to see if I would. So I quit promising. And I just kept showing up. Week after week after week. Until one afternoon I realized she'd stopped going to the window. I waited 7 months to bring them to my parents' house. I told myself I was being careful. The truth is, some part of me already knew. But I talked myself into it. I thought, they'll meet him. They'll see her. She's 7. How do you look at a 7-year-old and stay cold? We sat at that dining table, the one with the leaf put in for company. My mother asked Cole 3 questions about his work, and she made every one of them sound like a diagnosis. And that's, what, seasonal. My father folded his napkin. Bryn watched me over the rim of her wine glass with an expression I couldn't name at the time and understand perfectly now. And Wren sat very still and tried to use the correct fork, because I had shown her which one on the drive over, and she had practiced. She had practiced. I waited until dessert to say we were getting married. My mother did not look at me. She looked at the child. And then she said it, not to her, but over her, the way you'd discuss a piece of furniture with somebody in the room. "We don't take in other people's leftovers, Delia." Wren stopped chewing. She was 7. Not stupid. She didn't know the exact definition of the word. But she knew the temperature of it. She knew she'd just been picked up, weighed, and set back down on the wrong side of the room. Later, in the kitchen, with the water running so nobody could hear, my mother laid it out plainly. Him and his situation. Or your family. That's the choice. And then she reached for the weapon she would use on me for the next 11 years. And think about your father, she said. In his condition. You'd really do this to him right now? That was the first time I heard the phrase your father's condition. I did not know yet that a phrase could be a leash. I stayed. I picked up my coat and I took that man and that little girl out of my parents' front door, and I did not walk back through it again. We got married that August in Ottilie Pruitt's backyard. Ottilie was our neighbor. 74 years old, widowed, and she had decided, without asking a single one of us, that the three of us belonged to her now. She lent me a tablecloth she called the only thing my mother left me that wasn't a bill. There were 14 people there. Des Marchetti, Cole's oldest friend, who would end up building half of what came later, showed up with a folding table, a cooler, and a roll of electrical tape, and spent until midnight fixing the string lights that kept shorting out over the fence. Cole wore a borrowed jacket. Ren threw flower petals with the grim concentration of someone defusing something. And the night before, Cole said something to me I have never once forgotten. He said, "If your mother ever knocks on our door, we open it. I am not going to be the reason you lost your family." He meant it. For 11 years, that man kept that door unlocked. Even in the years when I wanted to nail it shut with both hands. So I mailed my parents an invitation. I told myself I was giving them a chance. It came back 16 days later. Unopened. My name crossed out in my mother's handwriting. Return to sender. No note. That was the note. I wasn't worth the paper cut of opening the envelope. I kept it. Old habit. I slid it in a drawer and tried very hard not to think about what it meant. And then the phone calls started. And here's the thing, they weren't for me. They were about me. My aunt called, voice low and wounded, and asked how I could do this to my father when he's like this. A cousin messaged that she was praying for my dad and hoping I could live with my choices. I sat there with the phone in my hand and I understood that my mother had already buried me. She'd built a story and mailed it out to everyone, and the story was, Delia left her dying father to run off with a laborer. And I believed it. That's the piece that still catches in my throat. I was cut off. No way to call him. No way to check. My mother controlled the phone and she controlled the room. So the guilt did exactly what it was engineered to do. Because who lies about that? Why would a woman say her own husband was dying if he wasn't? It was too ugly to be invented. So I carried it. And Ren carried something too. About 3 weeks after the wedding, sitting on the edge of her bed, she asked me, very quietly, not looking up, did they go away because of me? I didn't give her a speech. She was 7. Speeches are for the person giving them. I said, they went away because of who they are. You're the reason I stayed. And then I did the thing that actually mattered, which was the next morning. I went down to the school office and had myself put on her emergency card. I wrote my name on her lunchbox in permanent marker, Ren's, call Delia. She read it at breakfast. She didn't say a thing. But she carried that lunchbox around like it was a legal document. That night she got out the spiral notebook and started a fresh page. People who came. And the first name on it was mine. I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach, which, looking back, is almost funny. I had no idea that notebook would end up being the most important object I owned. Now, I need you to hold on to 2 things from these years, because both of them come back at the end and both of them cost my mother everything. 1, the phrase your father's condition. Remember that it started in a kitchen with the faucet running. 2, a little girl's list of who showed up. Because 11 years from that kitchen, my mother is going to walk into my living room holding a list of her own. And the two lists are going to end up on the same table. Keep going. It gets worse before it gets good. The first 4 years were lean in the specific, grinding way that does not make a good story. 2 jobs between us. A rental with a water heater that quit every February. Coal gone before light, home after dark, smelling like clay and diesel. Me doing claims all day and the books at night, learning how to make a small amount of money cover a slightly larger amount of life. He brought the hands. I brought the paperwork. Neither of us could have done it alone, and I want to say that plainly, because later on people tried to tell this story like I quietly bankrolled a great man. I didn't. We were 2 people carrying one house from opposite ends. There was one night that first winter that told me exactly who we were going to be. Ren spiked a fever at 2 in the morning. The kind where a small body goes hot like a stone out of a fire pit. And Cole was 3 counties east on an emergency job he could not walk off without losing the contract that was paying our electric bill. So it was me. And at the same time, same night, same hour, my phone was going off about a batch of claims that had to be reconciled before an audit at 8. The kind of thing that gets you noticed. Or gets you cut. I looked at the phone. And I looked at the 7-year-old shaking under 2 blankets. And it turned out not to be a hard choice at all. Which is how I found out it had never been a choice. I turned the phone face down on the dresser. I sat on the floor by her bed with a bowl of cool water and a washcloth until the fever broke a little after 5. I took a hit at work over that deadline. Real one. Set me back 2 years. And around dawn, Ren opened her eyes halfway and said, "You stayed the whole time." Not like a thank you. Like a scientist confirming a result. She'd been running that experiment on me since the day we met. And that night, the data came in. The next morning, before school, she wrote something at the bottom of the notebook page. I didn't see it until years later. It said, "Delia, all night." The drought summer was the one that changed everything, though nobody would have called it lucky at the time. 3 counties went dry. Wells that had run for 40 years started pulling sand and rust and worse. Cole spent that whole season pulling pumps and testing water that came up the color of weak tea. And somewhere in the middle of all that, he saw the thing nobody was measuring. He said it to me one night at our kitchen table, flat with exhaustion. They insure the house. They insure the barn. Nobody scores the water until somebody's already sick. There's no number for it. There's no number until it's a claim. He said it like a complaint. It turned out to be a company. Him and Des built a rough little tool that scored a property's water risk before anybody got sick. Depth, drawdown, what's uphill of you, what got sprayed on the land in 1974, how fast a plume moves through that particular kind of soil. Cole sketched the first version of it on the back of a feed store receipt. I filed that receipt. Because that is what I do. The first person who ever paid them $1 was a rural lender who took one look at the printout and said, "Can you do this for 200 properties?" Around that same time, Ren, 9 years old now, went with her dad to a job on a Saturday, and she came back with something in her mouth she couldn't get rid of. She kept saying the water there tasted like a penny. She was 9. She didn't have the words. But she had the tongue for it, and Cole ran the sample, and she was right. And there is one more thing from that year I have to give you, because it matters more than anything else I've said so far. We were up at Audley's one afternoon and I had a shoebox of old photographs out. And Ren pulled one out and held it up. It was the orchard. The white farmhouse, the peach rows, my grandfather's hand-dug well with the stone collar around it. She studied it the way her father studies a job site. And she said, "Why is the well down at the bottom of the hill?" I said, "Honey, I don't know. It's always been there." And she said, "Everything runs downhill. That's a bad spot. Somebody's gonna find out someday." She was 9 years old. Remember that. Please remember she said that, 7 years before it meant a single thing to anybody. I want to be honest about the part of this I'm least proud of. I kept knocking. Every Thanksgiving. Every Christmas. Every one of my father's birthdays. I sent something. I called something. I passed a message through somebody. For 8 straight years. And every time, the answer came back the same. Blocked numbers. Messages relayed through relatives asking me not to upset your father. Cards returned. There's a stack of them in my house held together with a rubber band, and every year that stack got thicker, and every single card in it is addressed in a child's handwriting. Ren mailed them herself. She'd walk them down to the blue box on the corner because she liked the sound the lid made. The worst one was the funeral. My grandmother died the spring Ren turned 11. I found out 4 days after the service from a cousin who assumed somebody had told me. Nobody had. My mother had simply left my name off the list. The way you'd leave a line off an invoice. And when the photos went around later, there was Bryn in the front row, in the seat that would have been mine, holding down the spot in the family I'd been erased out of without so much as a phone call. I wasn't grieving my grandmother in that moment. I'd done that already. What I was grieving was the confirmation. To my mother, I was not a person who'd been wronged. I was a line item that had been removed. Listen. If your family has ever treated the person you love like something to be thrown out, if you've ever been handed that choice at a dinner table, I want to hear it. Put it in the comments. Not for me. For the next person scrolling past this at 1 in the morning who thinks they're the only one it ever happened to. You are not. And it genuinely helps to see the number. There was a crack in the story once, years before I was ready to look through it. My aunt let something slip on the phone. Small thing. Ordinary. She said my father still went out to the lake every Sunday morning, same as he always has, and then she caught herself, and there was this little pause, and she changed the subject to a casserole. Too late. A dying man does not go fishing every Sunday for 8 years. I wrote the date down in my notebook, because that is what I do. And then I closed the notebook and told myself I'd misunderstood her. Because the alternative was a door I was not strong enough to open yet. I filed that note in the same drawer as the returned envelope. And I did not let the two of them touch. Around that same time, Ren found the word. She was 12. She came into the kitchen holding her old notebook, and she said, very evenly, I looked up what she called me. Leftovers is the stuff nobody wanted enough to finish. She didn't cry in front of me. She tore a small strip off the corner of the page, the corner where she'd written my family, and she went upstairs. I taped it back that night after she was asleep. No lecture. Just tape. Some things you fix with your hands instead of your mouth. And it was a cousin, one of the decent ones, who finally reframed my father for me. She said, Delia, he asks about you. Every time. But your mother runs that phone and she runs the story. I didn't forgive him for that. Being controlled is not the same thing as being innocent. But I started separating them in my head. My quiet father. And my mother, who needed the lie so badly. And that's when the questions started keeping me up. If my father wasn't the one running this, then why did my mother need him to be dying? What was the lie actually for? I stopped knocking the year Ren turned 12. Not out of anger. Out of self-respect, which took me an embarrassingly long time to locate. I put everything into one tin box. The returned cards. The crossed-out envelope. My dated notes. Ren's taped-up notebook. I put the lid on it and set it on the high shelf in the hall closet. I thought I was closing something. Turns out I was just filing it for the right day. Meanwhile, the company grew one rung at a time, and never smoothly. There was a year a state contract collapsed at the last second, new administrator, budget vanished, 9 months of Cole's work wiped out in a 4-minute phone call. Money ran out. Cole sat at our table and said maybe he should go back to just drilling. Maybe it had been stupid to think a guy like him gets to build something. I did not save that company. I want to be honest about my role. I just refused to let it drown on a Tuesday. I got into the numbers, found where we were bleeding, cut it off, and renegotiated our 2 remaining clients so we'd survive the quarter. I bought us 1 more month. And in that month, a national lender called back, because 2 more counties had gone bad and suddenly everybody needed exactly the thing Cole had built. By year 7, they'd raised real money. 30 people. An actual office with an actual sign. Cole still went out to job sites in boots, because he never trusted a risk score he hadn't stood on top of. My first business card made me laugh out loud when it printed. Director of Operations. I built the systems. I kept the contracts. I time-stamped every document and logged every permission, because that's the only way I know how to keep a company honest. He built what kept people's water clean. I built what kept the company clean. And then, that March, Springline Analytics went public. I'm not going to walk you through the machinery, because the machinery is not the point. The company came out valued right around $212 million. Our household's shares came to about 1/5 of that. The headline number, the one that ended up in a group text my mother sent to 9 relatives, was $41 million. Here's what the headline did not say. That money lived entirely on paper. Our shares were locked for 180 days. Couldn't sell them. Couldn't easily borrow against them. Couldn't turn them into a house, or a check, or a rescue for anybody. What we actually had in the bank that week would have covered a used truck and a new roof. $41 million, said the headline. And I read it standing in my kitchen next to a mortgage statement. My family only ever saw the headline. Not one of them ever read the part that said on paper. 11 days. That's how long it took. 11 years of returned mail, and 11 days after that number hit the internet, my mother's name lit up my phone for the first time since I was 26. And I want you to keep count with me from here, because the timeline is the whole case. Every warm word that woman said to me from this point forward arrived within 9 days of a piece of financial news. Every single one. I know, because I wrote them all down. Stay with me. The folder is coming. Her voice came through warm and smooth, like we'd just lost touch the way people do. Like distance is weather that happens on its own. Delia. Sweetheart. It's been too long. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just, too long. As if time was the thing that had crossed my name off that envelope, and not her hand holding a pen. She wanted to come by. To reconnect. This weekend, if that worked. Bryn texted within the hour. Warm. Nostalgic. 3 paragraphs about the summer we slept on the orchard porch and counted heat lightning. 2 messages of pure sugar. And then, message 4, have you and Cole talked about what families owed here? And my stomach dropped. Because I had read that message before. There was a text buried in my phone from 4 years earlier that I'd never deleted. Bryn had reached out once before. Same warmth. Same orchard porch. Same heat lightning. I had cried in a grocery store parking lot over that message. And 4 messages in, she'd asked me to co-sign something. Just temporary. Just till things turned around at the business. I'd said no. Gently. And she'd gone silent for 4 years. Now I pulled both threads up on my screen and laid them side by side. Same opening line. Same childhood memory. Same pivot, at the same message count. My sister had a script. And she was running it on me a second time. I showed it to Ottilie, who was 85 by then and had exactly 0 patience left in her body. She looked at my phone for about 9 seconds and handed it back and said, "Honey. They don't want you back. They want a return on you." And then she told me to write down every contact and the date it came. So I did. Cole had brought in a lawyer that year named Nadine Cobb, mostly to make sure our paperwork was clean for what was coming. But I told Nadine the family story. All of it. Because I'd figured out by then that lawyers are just professional keepers of receipts, and I recognized a colleague. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. And at the end she said something I did not understand until much later. Here's your problem, Delia. Everybody can feel that your mother lied. Feeling isn't proof. What you'd need is her, in writing, asking for something in exchange for the lie. And you don't have that. I said, so what do I do? And she tapped her pen twice on the table and said, nothing. People like this always put it in writing eventually. The day they finally want something, they write it down. They can't help it. And on her legal pad she wrote 3 words and underlined them. Wait for the list. I also found out that season that Bryn's life was nothing like the version my family advertised. A relative let it slip that the golden child was underwater. A business gone bad. Debts she was hiding from my mother. A second marriage that had ended with no announcement, because in our family an announcement is only for the good news. That landed strangely on me. I'd spent 30-some years being held up against Bryn and coming up short. And now I understood that the yardstick had been hollow the whole time. And I understood something else. A family with a favorite in free fall will eventually come looking for a net. Then 2 things showed up inside 4 weeks of each other. And I could not unsee either one. The first was a letter, forwarded to me by a relative who thought I ought to know. It was a notice on the orchard. The county had come back on the well. Nitrate and something worse, tracking downhill out of 80 years of what got put on that ground, straight into a hand-dug well sitting at the bottom of a slope. The house was on a boil order. The land was unsellable in that condition. The remediation number at the bottom of the page was just under $300,000. The orchard. The one thing my mother treasured as proof of who we were. The property they had specifically, carefully carved out of anything that might ever come to me. And standing there holding that letter, I heard a 9-year-old's voice say, everything runs downhill. That's a bad spot. Somebody's gonna find out someday. The second thing was a photograph. My kind cousin sent it with no message. Just the picture. It was my father. At the lake. Standing on the bank in a ball cap holding up a stringer of crappie, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Color good. Shoulders square. Standing on his own 2 legs. The date stamp was 19 days old. My dying father. The man I had grieved in advance for 11 years. Was out in the sun with a fish and a grin. 11 years of guilt cracked straight down the middle in one photograph. I did not explode. And I want you to understand what that cost me, because I am not a saint. I'm just a woman who learned very young that the calm hand is the one that keeps the receipts. I sat with that picture for a long time. And I felt the leash come off my neck. And underneath the anger, something colder came up. If he was fine, then the lie was never about protecting him. It was about controlling me. And a lie that patient, that carefully maintained, for that many years, that is not a lie built for nothing. That is a lie built for a payoff. Cole and I talked it through at the kitchen table. The same table where the numbers had once made him think about quitting. We decided to open the door one time. Listen. Don't argue. Let them talk. People show you everything, Cole said, when they think they've already won. We set our limits before they arrived, the way you agree on a plan before you walk out into weather. We even rehearsed the word no out loud, so it wouldn't stick in my throat when it mattered. And we agreed on one thing without any discussion at all. Ren would not be in that room. She was 16. This was not a wound we were going to reopen in front of her. She went to Audley's for the evening and took her homework and her attitude with her. Before I sat down, I took the tin box off the high shelf and set it on the kitchen counter. Closed. Within reach. They came on a Saturday, a little after 2. My mother in her good coat. Bryn half a step behind her, the way she'd walked her whole life. And in my mother's hands, a folder. I noticed the folder before I noticed my own mother's face. Because I noticed things. It was not new. The corners were soft from handling. The edges of the pages inside were dense with her handwriting in 3 different colors of ink. Whatever was in that folder had existed for a long time. It had been drafted, revised, sat on, carried around, and waited with. That was not the spontaneous overture of a mother who missed her daughter. That folder was ready before the company ever went public. We sat in the living room. Cole offered coffee. Nobody took it. My mother looked around my house and I watched her do arithmetic on it. Pricing the furniture. Appraising the life. Then she folded her hands on top of that worn folder and said, in the gentlest voice she owns, "We think it's time to heal this family. But healing means being honest about what everybody sacrificed." And she slid it across the table. Item 1. $2,400,000. 4, and I'm quoting, the total investment in your upbringing, education, and formation. Item 2. Springline was to assess and fully remediate the orchard well at our expense. Because, her words, that's expertise this family has now. Item 3. A position at the company for Bryn, given her relationships in the industry, which was the first I had ever heard of my sister having any. Item 4. $6,000 a month, ongoing, for my father's medical care. And item 5. The one that made my hands go still on my knees. A written statement to be circulated to the entire extended family, confirming that I had come home. That I had returned to the people who raised me. Cole picked up the folder. He read the whole thing. Unhurried. I watched his eyes go down the page, and then track back up and stop on one line, and stay there. And then this small smile touched the corner of his mouth. I have to be careful describing it, because it wasn't cruel and it wasn't triumph. It was the exact expression of a man watching somebody hand him the one thing he could never have gotten for himself. He set the page down. He leaned toward me. And he whispered one word. Perfect. Then he said it to the room, at normal volume, almost kindly, "You just put it in writing. My attorney's been waiting 11 years for this page." My mother's face changed. There was one held beat where she stopped breathing. And then she reached for the folder, actually reached, like she could pull the words back into it with her hand. Bryn looked between us, not understanding yet. I didn't fully understand yet either. But I had seen my mother's face, and I trust my mother's face more than I trust my own confusion. Cole didn't explain it in lawyer language. He explained it the way you explain something to family. For 11 years you've told everybody in 3 counties that she walked out on a dying man. He tapped the page. And you just handed me a bill for his medical care. $6,000 a month. I've got a photograph of him from 19 days ago holding a stringer of fish. That was the first crack. And my mother heard it split. But she was not going to sit there and be read to. She straightened up in her chair. That's private. You don't understand this family. And I said, I understand it now. And I got up and I brought the tin box in from the kitchen. I want to tell you I'd planned every word. I hadn't. I only knew the order, because I'd been keeping things in that order for 11 years. I took out the photograph first. And I laid it face up on the folder, directly on top of item 4. He's fine, Mom. He's been fine. You froze him at the worst 9 weeks of his life and you've been charging me interest on it ever since. She started in about his heart. About the scare. And I let her, because that part was almost true. So I finished it for her. He had a real event. 11 years ago. Right when you cut me off. A stent, 3 frightening weeks, and then he recovered. Completely. And you never once corrected the story. Because a recovered husband is no use to you. A dying one is a leash. You kept him dying in the telling, because it kept me guilty and it kept everybody else furious at me. And that's when Bryn jumped in. And this is where I finally saw her angle. She didn't defend the story. She pivoted. To fairness. To family. To how hard it had been for everyone. And in doing it, she said the sentence that let the whole machine show through the paint. You've got $41 million, Delia. It wouldn't even hurt you. It never once occurred to you that we might actually need it. Need. Not deserve. Not be owed. Need. My sister. The crown jewel of the Ainsley family. Said need. So I took out my phone. And I found the text from 4 years ago, and I found the one from 3 weeks ago, and I read them out loud, back to back, in front of both of them. Same opening. Same orchard porch. Same heat lightning. Same pivot on message 4. You have a script, I said. You ran it on me 4 years ago to co-sign your way out of a hole. And you're running it again. Then I looked at my mother. This was never a mother missing her daughter. This is a rescue for her. Same as it's always been. You just needed me to get big enough to fund it. Bryn's silence was the loudest thing in that house. Then I put my finger on item 5. The public statement. You can't have both. For 11 years I'm the ungrateful daughter who walked out on a dying man. Now you want me to reimburse you for raising me, and stand in front of the whole family and announce that I came home. Pick one. Because you put both of them on the same page, in your own handwriting. A lawyer only needs the page. My mother's mouth opened and closed. She reached one last time for the version of events she'd lived inside for over a decade. We only ever wanted what was best for you. And I said, then where were you the night she asked me if you left because of her? And I set down the cards. The whole rubber-banded stack. 11 years of a child's birthday cards. Every one. Addressed in Wren's handwriting. Every one stamped return to sender. I didn't say anything for a second. I just let them look at the pile. Then, this is what you sent back. Every year. You couldn't even open them. She's the leftovers you refused to unwrap. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with drama. Even Bryn had nothing. And my mother looked at that stack of cards, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched that woman come right up to the edge of the truth. Something in her face gave. Just slightly. The way a face does right before a person says I'm sorry and actually means it. And then the front door opened. My father walked in. On his own 2 feet. Steady. Color good. Exactly the way he looked in that photograph. And I understood the whole thing instantly. She had left him in the car. She'd brought him along as a prop. The frail old man waiting out at the curb to make her case for her without ever having to open his mouth. She never intended for him to come in and be seen. But he'd gotten out of the car. And he'd walked up my steps by himself. After 11 years of folding his napkin into a small perfect square, my father had finally decided not to sit still. He looked at the table. At the photograph. At the stack of return cards. At the folder underneath both. And then he looked at me. And I said, and my voice did not shake, which surprised me more than anything else that day, you told them you were dying. You buried me alive to keep him. My father did not fold a single thing. His hands stayed down at his sides. And he said, in front of both of them, she's right. I let it happen. That's all he managed in that moment. But it was more than he'd given me in 11 years. And it landed like weather breaking over a dry field. Bryn tried one more time to make it about need. About fairness. About what a family owes. My mother tried to gather up the folder and her dignity at the same time and couldn't manage either. But the thing they came to do was already dead on the table, somewhere between the photograph and the cards. There was nothing left to demand. You cannot bill somebody for abandoning you and bill them for raising you on the same page. And you cannot present a dying man who walks in under his own power. I made the decisions out loud. Because I'd spent my entire life letting other people narrate me, and I was finished with that. There would be no $2.4 million. There would be no rescue dressed up as a reconciliation. Springline would not touch that well. The orchard was theirs. Its problems were theirs. I was done being this family's solution to a fire they'd been feeding for 80 years. And the story about me was going to stop. Nadine would send a letter making those terms plain. And thanks to that folder, the letter had teeth. Not a lawsuit. Not a courtroom. Just the simple documented fact that they had known the truth and sold the lie for money, and what that would cost my mother in the only small world she had ever cared about, if it continued. And then I did one more thing. I took Wren's notebook out of the tin box. The taped one. And I laid it across the folder, right on top of item 5, the one that demanded I announce I'd come home. I opened it to the page from when she was 7 years old. People who came. She's been keeping a list since she was 6, I said. 11 years of it. Every person who ever showed up for her. You made a list too. It took you 11 years and it's got 5 items on it, and every single one of them is a bill. I closed the notebook. You're not on hers. And you don't get to be on mine. My mother stood up, reaching for the last word, the way she has done in every room she's ever been in. And my father sat down. On my side of the room. There was no trial. There didn't need to be. The story my mother spent 11 years telling died in about one afternoon. Because the people she'd been telling it to started hearing the other version, the one with a photograph and a stack of returned birthday cards attached. Her standing in that church, in that family, in that little world she'd spent her whole life curating, it did not survive the details. Bryn's situation was hers to manage. The rescue simply did not happen. And I have made my peace with not being responsible for that. Nadine's letter went out. A response came back agreeing to every term. It was the shortest and most honest communication I have ever received from my family. 3 weeks later my aunt called to apologize. She'd believed it for 11 years, and she said so out loud, which cost her something. And then she asked how Wren was. It was small. And it was late. And I took it anyway. Because I'm trying to be the kind of person who can tell the difference between an apology that costs something and one that doesn't. My father asked to see me alone. We met at a diner halfway between our lives. He did not fold his napkin. His hand stayed flat on the table the entire time. I noticed. Because I notice things. And because it was the first time in my life I'd watched that man refuse his own escape hatch. He said, I let her make you the villain because it was easier than standing up. That's mine. Not hers. Mine. I had a heart scare and I let her turn it into a weapon. And I sat in that kitchen and watched her put a little girl's birthday cards back in the mailbox, and I said nothing. There's no part of that I get to hand to your mother. I chose the quiet. Every year. 11 times. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't mention his age or how many years he might have left. He didn't ask for money and he didn't ask to be let back in like nothing happened. He just named it. One item at a time. The way you read a list you're finally ready to own. I told him, I can forgive you, Dad. That part's free. Trust is the expensive one. You'll pay that slowly, and I set the price. He nodded like a man who'd expected exactly that and considered it fair. So we started with a coffee once a month. Small. Conditional. Something either of us can walk away from. A narrow door propped open just wide enough for one person, and shut to the two who never earned their way back through. At the second coffee, he asked if he might meet Wren someday. Not soon, he said fast. Whenever she wants. If she ever wants. Her call. I told him that was the right way to ask. And he said, of course it is. And I believed him. Which was new. I drove home that afternoon lighter than I'd been in 11 years. Wren was on the porch with the notebook in her hands. 16 years old, feet on the railing. She'd heard the outline of it by then, the parts a 16-year-old should hear. She turned that old paper over, looking at her own 7-year-old handwriting. And she said, I looked up leftovers again. It means the part that got left because nobody wanted to finish it. She handed the notebook to me. You kept every dumb card I ever made. For 11 years. So I guess I was never the leftovers. And she shrugged. The way teenagers shrug when they're saying something enormous and they need you not to make it weird. I was just family. You just had to prove it to everybody the hard way. That night we did the most ordinary thing in the world. We made a bad dinner. All three of us crowded into a kitchen too small for it. Cole burned the garlic. Des showed up and burned the bread. Ren narrated our failures like a sportscaster. Ottilie came over for the leftovers she pretended not to want, which I have never once let her live down. Nobody kept a ledger. Nobody was owed anything. It was loud and imperfect, and it was, by every measure that has ever counted, a family at a table. I had that notebook page framed. It hangs by our front door now. 7-year-old handwriting, one torn corner, a strip of tape across it. People who came. The orchard isn't in it. It never was her family. It was just a white house at the bottom of a hill that a 9-year-old looked at once and understood before any of the rest of us did. People ask me sometimes if the money fixed it. It didn't. The money sat locked on paper for most of this story, and it never healed one single thing. What fixed it was smaller and much harder to sell. It was a man who kept a door unlocked for 11 years without ever once pushing me through it. It was an 85-year-old woman who clapped twice as loud from a seat my parents never came to fill. It was a girl who tested whether I'd stay, and then one day stopped checking the window. Family is not the people who raised you and kept the receipt. It is not blood, and it is definitely not net worth. Family is whoever is still in the room when you have nothing to offer. And still in it when you suddenly have everything, and they want none of it for themselves. If any part of this reached you, if you are the person right now being told that the people you love are baggage, or leftovers, or a burden, if your worth in your own family is being measured in what you can be billed for, here's the one thing it took me 11 years to learn. You are allowed to close the door. You're allowed to keep it closed to some people and open it a crack for others. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing, and you hold the key to both of them. Share this with somebody who needs to hear that today. And subscribe if you want to stay for the next one, because there's always a next one, and there is always somebody out there finally setting down a weight they were never supposed to be carrying. I'll see you there. Thank you for staying to the end with me.